starting to wonder if ESPN is having buyer's remorse. I'm starting to wonder if executives at ESPN are starting to regret their decision to break the bank for Pat McAfee. Oftentimes, the absolute worst time to make a big decision is during a period of struggle. When times are tough, people have a tendency to be emotional. Emotion often clouds your better judgment. It is no secret that ESPN has been struggling the last few years. I mean, they haven't created a homegrown star in years, maybe even a decade. Well, Casey, what about Mina Kimes? She's a huge star. Mina Kimes? Really? Just because you have 1 million followers on Twitter, it doesn't mean you're a huge star. Dylan Mulvaney has a big social media following. Do you think Bobby D is a huge star? We have been told that Megan Rapinoe is a huge star, but for some reason, the prepubescent boy has a real difficult time convincing people to watch her pretend soccer matches on television. ESPN knows that Mina Kimes does not move the needle. ESPN knows that Mina Kimes is not a draw on television, which is why she is so protected. It's why ESPN's never given her her own show. Stephen A. Smith is considered to be the biggest star at ESPN, and his ratings aren't what I would call great. Matter of fact, and some of you guys might be surprised to hear me say this, but looking at the ratings for First Take, I would say that Shannon Sharpe has become the biggest star at ESPN, which is incredibly ironic when you think about it. The two biggest stars at ESPN are Shay and A. One is a grown man who calls himself Shay Shay. The other has 9 toes out the door. I think Stephen A. Smith would jump off this sinking Titanic at ESPN today if he could. But what do both of these men have in common? Both of their media careers were boosted by their partnership with Skip Bayless, the same Skip Bayless that they spent the entire month of September trying to discredit. Earlier this year, Disney CEO Bob Iger, he announced that for the first time ever, ESPN's financials would be released separately from Disney. No more Mickey Mouse Band-Aids, no more hiding the bleeding. For the first time, at least from a financial perspective, ESPN would be on their own. Now, the report was released last week. We covered it here on the channel. You can find the video on the archives here on YouTube. But with the network struggling, their financials being released separately from Disney for the very first time, executives at ESPN this past spring, they felt like they needed to make a splash. They needed to inject some life into their dying brand. They have their core audience of shit fucks who are going to watch regardless. I mean, it's not like they have anything else to do. It's not like they have jobs. That core audience of 2, maybe 300,000, they are going to watch ESPN every day regardless, thanks to their government-supplied cable and TV. But executives at ESPN, they needed someone who could attract the attention of normal people. They take a look at their lack of talent roster, looking for their next big star, looking for someone who could boost ratings. My God, our roster sucks. We have no star power. There's not a single person at our network who is appealing to normal people. ESPN was looking for a savior. For years, they had tried to create a homegrown star themselves. They wasted millions of dollars trying to make Bomani Jones the face of the network. Instead, he became the face of the huge embarrassing failure. They tried with Maria Taylor. Failure. They tried pairing Max Kellerman with Stephen A. Smith. Failure. Tried with Kendrick Perkins. Failure. Ryan Clark. Failure. The entire division of ESPN Radio. Failure. Malika Andrews. Failure. Elle Duncan. Failure. With emotions running high, the pressure of their financials being released, and the complete lack of star power at the network, ESPN decided that their best move was to break the bank for Pat McAfee. They give him $85 million over, I think it's over a period of 5 years. Now, when this deal was announced, I told you guys this was the wrong move for both ESPN and Pat McAfee. Over the weekend, we started to see the first signs that there could be trouble in woke paradise. First of all, the timing of this announcement last spring, it could not have been worse. In the midst of a massive round of layoffs where ESPN is firing some of the favorite deacons at Woke United Methodist. Hell, they even fired their pastor, the esteemed Father Jalen Rose. Now, Father J, he was viewed as a motivational leader to those who consume the woke wiener. He was known for delivering impassioned sermons on the dangers of Mount Rushmore. Ooh, that mountain is so dangerous. It features the faces of white men. In the middle of the Deacons experiencing the expiration of their woke welfare, ESPN announces that they are going to give Pat McAfee $85 million. Now, naturally, this went over like a straight man inside of Club Shay Shay. The shitfucks, they were angry. They were very, very bitter. Not only were their favorite Deacons fired, their collective salaries, they were given to the enemy. Before he even debuted on the network, ESPN had already found a way to turn their audience against Pat McAfee. Now, I have explained several times that this was a bad move for Pat McAfee because he just doesn't fit the culture or the audience at the worldwide leader in woke. Anytime I see someone publicly defend themselves against negative publicity, it leads me to believe that there's a level of truth to it, leads me to believe that the negative publicity that they're receiving is not only true, but it's bothering them. If it wasn't true, if it didn't bother them, why would they waste time addressing it and giving it even more publicity? For example, several weeks ago, we talked about Pat McAfee struggling in the ratings at ESPN. After I posted that video, several media sites ended up running with the story. ESPN issues a press release defending Pat McAfee, and Pat McAfee addressed his ratings the following morning on his show. They tried to paint this picture that the show was this massive success on television, when in reality, that could not be further from the truth. Now, if that story didn't bother Pat McAfee, if he was actually pulling big ratings, huge success, why would he need to address it? Wouldn't you just let the ratings do the talking? Last week, we talked about a poll that was conducted by The Athletic. They polled over 3,100 viewers at ESPN. They asked them what they thought about Pat McAfee on College Gameday. Nearly half the respondents detest Pat McAfee on College Gameday. Yesterday morning, Pat McAfee, he decides to respond to the poll. Check it out for yourself. Now, to be completely fair, Pat McAfee is not wrong in what he's saying in that first paragraph. Hell, he doesn't even need to discredit The Athletic. They are perfectly capable of doing that themselves. Now, for those that don't know, The Athletic, it is a struggling dump. They're kind of similar to the WNBA. The WNBA would cease to exist without being subsidized by the NBA. The Athletic, they would cease to exist had they not been purchased by the New York Times. But I understand what Pat McAfee was trying to do here. He is insinuating that the people who read The Athletic, they're not going to like him anyway. And you know what? Pat McAfee, he is 100% right. But here's the problem. You know who reads The Athletic? The people reading The Athletic, these are the same people who are watching ESPN, which is why I keep saying Pat McAfee does not fit at the worldwide leader in woke. In his tweet, Pat McAfee hinted that he would be leaving College Gameday after this season. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if he was asked to leave. Over the last week, I have received countless emails from this audience about Pat McAfee on College Gameday and at Pat McAfee on ESPN in general. Every one of these emails that I received, they all echo the same sentiment. Pat McAfee doesn't fit the show. He doesn't fit College Gameday. He feels out of place. He goes out of his way to be funny, and oftentimes there ain't nothing funny about him. Like I told you guys last week, my biggest takeaway from that poll from The Athletic, it wasn't that half the respondents didn't like Pat McAfee. My biggest takeaway was 20% of the audience had no opinion of him altogether. That is a massive, massive number of people. If you applied this poll to the overall audience of College Gameday, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who have no opinion of Pat McAfee. In the business of entertainment, that is the worst position that you could be in. Why? Because it means Pat McAfee is failing to leave an impression on the ESPN audience. It means that Pat McAfee is irrelevant to that portion of the audience. They don't notice him. If ESPN pulled him off the show, they wouldn't even know. Now, it is entirely possible that I am reading too much into this, but here's how I'm seeing it. With Pat McAfee admitting publicly that he is being outright rejected by the ESPN audience, I am taking this as Pat McAfee acknowledging that this ain't working out. Now, sure, we could look at this through a positive lens. We could look at the poll results and say 30% of the ESPN audience is accepting of Pat McAfee, but what about the other 70%? Pat McAfee is still pulling big numbers here on YouTube, but he was doing that before ESPN. He was brought to the network to be a draw on television. He was brought to ESPN to bring that YouTube audience onto linear television. We are 2 months into this experiment, and there is one thing that is abundantly clear: it ain't working. Last week, the Pat McAfee Show, it averaged 258,000 viewers on ESPN. Now, that is half the audience of his lead-in First Take. I pulled up a list of ratings for ESPN. Pat McAfee, he doesn't make the top 25 on the network. He's not making the top 25 on a network that is struggling to draw ratings. Where Pat McAfee is on this list, he is sitting beside the 1 a.m. edition of SportsCenter. He is barely ranked above something called pickleball and high school basketball. His ratings are so bad, the WNBA pregame show drew a larger audience. God. Pat McAfee put himself, I think, in a lose-lose here. Sure, he's winning financially. I mean, there's no question about that, but is he really winning long-term? He is being outright rejected by the ESPN audience. And from what I've been told, many of his long-term followers, they are rejecting him because they feel like Pat McAfee sold out. I am wondering if ESPN is feeling buyer's remorse. How much longer before they start making changes to the show? How much longer before they start making Pat McAfee acclimate to the ESPN audience and culture? One thing is abundantly clear. What they are doing now, it ain't working. And it's not going to work because Pat McAfee's style does not fit this network. And he doesn't have the drawing power that ESPN thought he had to pull normal people to the channel. But give me your thoughts. Pat McAfee publicly hints that he is quitting College Gameday. Is this the first sign that things are not working out for Pat McAfee at ESPN, or do you think I am reading far too much into it? You let me know. Sound off in the comments below. Like, subscribe, share the video. I appreciate every one of you guys and your continued support. Best way to contact me is by email at btlkc84@gmail.com, KC_BTL84 on Twitter. I'll see you guys later.